I have 128, so.
Oh, we have one.
You can keep chatting.
Right.
I'm going with the FDIB
It
to
is just
South
immediately.
Africa.
What is the University of
Which FDIB goes to South Africa?
Sorry?
Which one does go to South Africa?
I never had to take as many shots.
I had one college or two.
From where?
Yeah.
South Africa?
I have one.
I hate you.
Even the China manufacturer, you can't miss it, you know.
We're having problems.
That's a big building to make it up.
CDC right can't close it.
Fred, how long is that?
I wish they had that.
But I did that.
Well, they brought the colors
Now we're talking. Everybody was quiet too. Patience, we're patient. Okay, Fred.
Okay, we're going to start now. Thank you.
This will be on the final exam, so if you want to pass this class. Work, Brian.
Is that going to be anything in Hilton?
I'll give you a bronze for chatty class. The lunch group is a little more chatty. Very good. Welcome to the session this afternoon. We're glad to have Michael Solomon presenting today. And as you can see the presentation, the title of this presentation, I'm incredibly important, earth-shaking shifts in consumer behavior. Welcome.
Thank you. We have a room full of masochists here. Coming back from war, I thought I would just see, hear crickets chirping. But I did you a favor and I blow out the lights.
So we can go to sleep?
So that you can, just relax a little bit, especially you. Just calm down, relax. We got a heckler in the front row here, and I gave him extra credit for sitting in the front row. Okay, so thank you all for coming. Brian gave me this opportunity to do an additional session about consumer behavior, and I jumped at the opportunity because there's a lot to talk about. How many of you teach consumer behavior, by the way? Oh, boy. Now I'm a little intimidated. I was hoping nobody did, and I could impress you, but now I have to tap dance a little bit. But as you know, whether you teach consumer behavior or you happen to be a consumer, some of you are consumers too, right? There's a lot of changes going on. There's a Chinese curse that says, "May you live in interesting times," and I think we're living in interesting times right now. So a lot of exciting changes going on in consumer behavior, but also a lot of challenges as we try to keep up with that, both in our research and, of course, in the way we teach the subject to students. So I want to, in the time that I have here, and hopefully we have time for some discussion as well, what I want to do is try to kind of boil things down to some of the big changes that I'm seeing, and not saying these are the only changes, but I think they're all really big ones, and they're kind of fundamental ones. And I want to talk through what these are, and I want to give you some examples, and I have some demos of new technology, which probably won't work, because after all, when you're talking about technology, by definition, you know it's not going to work, right? But bear with me, and we'll do our best. So I'm going to try to go through all 5 of these in the time that we have, and again, all of you are experiencing these to some extent, so hopefully we can have some discussion about that. The basic challenge that underlies all of these is, how do we engage consumers today? And when you look in the trade literature, you see this word engagement a lot. And it's usually in a negative sense, in that we're having trouble engaging people who are so distracted, who are multitasking, and their attention is constantly being diverted to other things. You've probably heard the expression that we live in an eyeball economy, which means that it's not so much about money as it is competing just for eyeballs, for consumers' eyeballs, because there are so many different things going on. And so we come up with different ways to engage people. Reality TV, how about this cartoon? I love this cartoon. To me, reality TV is a total oxymoron, because there's nothing less realistic about, than reality TV. And if you don't believe that, I've got a bridge or maybe even a textbook to sell you. But I can assure you that a lot of that stuff is scripted. But that's not. But the point is that it does work, in the sense that we know plenty of people who do get engaged by reality TV, who are endlessly fascinated by, dare I say, Kim Kardashian or whoever the latest reality star is. And so at some level, the people who create those shows, may they burn in hell, you can see my bias, I can't stand these shows. But the people who create these shows have figured out that in this day and age, that's the kind of formula, or one formula, that will work, because it's taking these jaded consumers now and creating an environment where they are intrinsically motivated to really immerse themselves into the content. And of course, from a marketing perspective, that's what we, at the end of the day, what we all want to achieve. So we live in an interesting world where, and your students, or those of you that have worked, many of you have worked in industry, how do you manage customers who don't want to be, quote, managed? That is, it's bad enough to manage students. We know that that's impossible. But how do you manage customers who increasingly are empowered because of the technology and so on, to choose their own course? We know this. If you're in television or something like that, you just don't dictate what people are going to watch anymore. I mean, everybody understands this. So how do we deal with people who are increasingly sophisticated, these digital natives who are very sophisticated? They've grown up knowing that they are being marketed to. There's that, that M word, being marketed to. And they often will push back against that. But the thing is, when you've been doing this for a number of years, you start to realize that actually a lot that you think is new is not so new. You've kind of heard it before. So you may remember, is anybody old enough other than me to remember a book called Generation X? So this is where the term Generation X came from, and subsequently Generation Y and Generation Z. And I like to tell my students when I'm lecturing to them about market segmentation, I say, does anybody have any idea why you're called Gen Y? And of course they have no idea. So in this book, Generation X, there was actually a chapter entitled, I Am Not a Market Segment. Now that book was published in 1991. So it's not that this resistance to being marketed to is anything new, but I think it's almost a given today that people don't, they're happy to interact with companies on their own terms. It's not that people aren't interested in brands, right? Millennials are very interested in brands, but they're doing it on their own terms, and they don't want to think about themselves, whether rightly or not, as belonging to a segment of people that shares characteristics with them. They want to be unique. So we have a tendency in marketing to be much more comfortable putting people into boxes, because we feel and managers feel like they can control people better if we, and this is what we teach our students, I think, still, market segmentation, principles of marketing, it's all about putting people into large, homogeneous categories to share some meaningful characteristics. That's the definition of market segmentation. So anybody used to watch Weeds when it was on? So Weeds is a great show, and the theme song, let's see if I can get this technology.
Little boxes on the hillside, little boxes made of ticky-tacky, little boxes on the hillside, little boxes all the same. There's a green one and a pink one and a blue one and a yellow one, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same. And the pink.
So the people in the houses
all went to the university where they.
So the people in the houses all went to the university, and the idea is that we're spewing out these undergraduates or MBA students that are taught to think in terms of boxes. And many of us, myself included, have been trained to think in terms of putting people into boxes. I was trained as an experimental social psychologist, and everything goes into a box because you have cells, you have independent variables and dependent variables, and they mix together in interesting ways. So as I like to say, there are two kinds of people in this world. People who think there are two kinds of people. So, it really is a part of our DNA I think for many of us, again, myself included, to think in these terms, and certainly from a management perspective, this is the way I think a lot of these things. So we have the so-called positivist tradition of doing science. Again, the way I was trained, which is that we like to organize things so that we can study them or measure them or manage them. And when you look at a lot of stuff that's going out there in the business world, you see a tremendous number of different organization schemes over the years. And of course, these come and go because, as we know, this is really fashion, isn't it? Management is a fashion phenomenon. Depending on what's in vogue at the time, it could be Six Sigma or management by walking around or whatever the buzzwords are. People are trying to impose a certain template on their customers. So this is just naturally the way we think about things, and maybe even it literally is fashion. In the sense you can do your fingernails as quadrants as well, I suppose. So when we come down to marketing, how do we put people into boxes? Well, the most obvious is that we create these broad categories, market segments such as rich people versus poor, geographical segments, gender segments, age segments. This is the way we think about the world, and we expect that when we put people into these segments, they're gonna have a lot in common with other people in the segment by definition. So that brings me to thinking about some basic boxes, that is, dichotomies that I think organize a lot of the way we think about customers and consumer behavior. And these are the 5 changes that I want to talk about, because these are contrasts: offline versus online, work versus play, the self versus what we own, me, my identity versus we, and consumers versus producers. You don't get much more basic than these dichotomies. We're all used to thinking this way. And what I'm going to argue is that, in fact, these dichotomies, these boxes, are no longer valid. I'm not sure they ever were. I think they were, but they're certainly not now. And so what we're going to see as we allow for the idea that, in fact, these boundaries no longer exist, it actually creates what the Chinese call living in interesting times, because it really frees us up to think in new ways about how consumers are kind of going about their day and how we can talk to them. But it also creates challenges because we're very comfortable with these boxes. These are our boxes, this is what we're used to thinking about. So for those of you that are used to looking, maybe some of you work in the qualitative area, if you work in interpretive research, the so-called postmodern kind of perspective on the world. Certainly your colleagues in English departments know about this, but a lot of marketers know about it as well. You know, and the postmodern perspective as opposed to the positivist perspective, at the risk of generalizing and oversimplifying, essentially in postmodernism, what they're going to say is that a lot of boundaries no longer are really relevant, and particularly the boundary between the researcher and the respondent when it comes down to the research. So as a result, perhaps, of living in a so-called postmodern culture, or even what some have called a post-postmodern culture, that's how fast things are changing, it's just a different way that, it's a different perspective that affirms that probably some of these boundaries are. So let me just jump right in and talk about the first boundary that I think is obsolete. And I mentioned this very briefly in my talk at lunch, which is the relationship between being offline and being online. So again, most of us are spending a tremendous amount of time, quote, online. Certainly our students are spending even more time online. Does anybody know, on average, how many hours a day the average teenager spends looking at a screen, whether it's a phone or a tablet or a TV? Anybody know the data on that?
I think it's
Yeah, it's actually, when you count in multitasking, that is looking more than one screen at a time, it's closer to 11 hours a day. Think about that. 11 hours a day looking at screens. So we're all doing that. Some of you are doing that while I'm talking to you. But the point is that when I'm doing it, I'm pretty aware that I'm doing it. You know, I am deliberately going from the physical world into the digital world. Again, I may do it a lot, but I kind of know that I'm doing it. Which gives me an excuse to show you a picture of one of my granddaughters. This is Rose. Rose lives in California. I was probably mentioned at lunch. I don't get to see her too much because my son-in-law had the nerve to move to California and take the kids with him. So I'll never forget. But one thing about Rose is, you know, Rose has two younger siblings as well. All girls, God help them. So that's my revenge. She's got to pay for weddings. But there's this technology that grandparents have discovered, and it's called Skype. So most technologies are pioneered by young people, but I think, you know, I've never seen the data, but I'm guessing a lot of old people like me use Skype to talk to their grandchildren. And the reason I mention this is I started thinking one day, you know, after Skyping with Rose, from her perspective as she grows up, is she, you know, she sometimes sees me or her grandmother, you know, or other people in the flesh, and sometimes she sees us on Skype. And I started to think, well, from her perspective, is she going to really understand that sometimes I'm there in the flesh and sometimes I'm not? Because literally from the time she was born, she's seen me, right? So when you think about that, when you think about that, that's pretty mind-blowing. When you talk to kids, a lot of times, and some of you may have done this with your own kids, they don't really have a sense that it's your digital self or your physical self. It's just you. And sometimes you're online and sometimes you're not. And that sounds like a really basic, simple idea, but if you really wrap your brain around that, I think it has tremendous implications for marketing. Because it means that we're talking to customers who don't really make a distinction between being offline and being online. So in my generation, we have what I would call a digital dichotomy. Again, we're either digital or we're not. We're either offline or online. But I think that dichotomy does not exist among kids today. Probably some good research to do there. I mean, I haven't actually done empirical research on this. It's anecdotal, but it's just what I've observed. So when we combine those two together, we have a tremendous amount of our lived experience that is actually occurring in online settings. And many people bemoan this and they say, you know, what is the motivation? Is your physical world that miserable that you have to be spending 11 hours a day in really where your consciousness is in a different place. Like this ad for a movie theater says, reality sucks. So we're going to escape to the digital world. And I think there is some of that. I mean, there's definitely some pathology when you look at what people are doing online and their motivations, adolescents or adults, their motivations for escaping online. But, you know, I think it goes well beyond that because there's lots of legitimate reasons to go online as well. So when we think about how technology is changing our everyday lived experience, it's helpful maybe to look at perspective like this. Now, this is the way Intel looks at the world. And I had the opportunity a few years ago to work with Intel to develop some programs related to how they look at virtual technologies. And so in return, I stole this slide from them. And what you're seeing here is that they talk about this, you know, bridging of the dichotomy as connected visual computing. That's the acronym that they use at Intel. And what they're saying is that they're all about creating rich visual interfaces between people and what's going on in these digital environments. And so to the extent that we can integrate or get access to other people without moving from our chairs, you know, looking at them online and integrating experiences that they're still having in the actual world, because at least part of the day we still have to live in the actual world, at least for now. And all the data that's going on, how can we now move from what they would think of as the limited static web? Sometimes we refer to that as Web 1.0, you know, where it's very passive, to Web 2.0, which we have now, where we have interactivity, which is between consumers and companies that has transformed the web, to connected visual computing. And so they see that happening in two different ways. I'm going to talk about both of those to some extent this afternoon. One way is to enhance our experience of the actual world, that is the physical world. And so there are different ways, and I mentioned earlier today, augmented reality. I'm going to talk more about that in a few minutes. Augmented reality, various kinds of visualization techniques that allow you to take the physical experience and enhance it. So you're not escaping into a virtual world, you're changing the way you experience your physical world. That's an important distinction. And then you can compare it to what they would think of as creating new digital worlds. And here, it's a totally immersive, fantasy-like experience. I'm going to talk more about that, but virtual worlds, multiplayer games, 3D digital entertainment. Some of you may be familiar with this stuff. Some of your students definitely are. I can tell you that their younger brothers and sisters are spending a tremendous amount of time every day interacting in virtual worlds. They're not going to the playground anymore, for better or worse. They're running home, they're going onto their computers, and they're interacting in virtual worlds. So when you look at some of the acquisitions that have occurred over the last year, you can really see, you know, in financial terms, where things are moving. So here you have Minecraft, which is a gaming platform that was bought by Microsoft. This is all within the last year for $2.5 billion. You have a platform called Twitch. Does anybody know what Twitch is? Twitch is, and I didn't know, and a lot of people in the industry didn't even. When they announced this, Amazon paid $1 billion for something called Twitch. So Amazon evidently figures that this platform is worth paying some money for. They've got money to burn, right? Twitch is a gaming platform, but a lot of the action that's going on is what's called esports. You guys heard? Some of you guys do sports marketing. You heard about esports?
Like NFL games?
No. Esports, this is a whole new thing. Some of your students, there are actually some universities that have esport teams now. Think about this. So for many of us, I'm not a gamer. I don't have the patience for video. But for people who play those games, that's great. But now what you have is thousands of people who pay for the opportunity to watch other people compete in video games. So when you talk about esports, this is a new category of sports where you have teams Again, in some cases, universities, or a few universities, I think, getting into this, but you have these professional teams that compete in stadiums. They'll compete in a stadium. For example, Korea, this is very popular in Korea, but it's coming over here as well. So you can imagine, I don't think I have a picture of this, but imagine a stadium with, with 10,000 people, like a basketball arena, let's say. And what you see up on the stage is a massive screen, and you've got two teams of players that are playing, one of these video games. So they have these players, some of them have become celebrities, they have followers, they sell merchandise. It's one of these enormous things that is under the radar for most of us. Definitely was for me when I read about it. So the name is Twitch. You can look it up if you don't. And then one that I'm very intrigued by, Facebook bought for $2 billion, they bought Oculus Rift. Everybody know Oculus Rift? That's a virtual reality headset. So when you put on the Oculus Rift, you are walking around in a kind of a holographic 3D environment. They're not available commercially yet. I had the opportunity to wear a developer's version a few months ago, and it was a roller coaster ride. And man, by the end of it, I was, you really think you're on a roller coaster. So the Oculus Rift is going to be launched probably in the next year or so. It's going to be $300 or something like that. And this is a tremendous, all you have to do is Google Oculus Rift, and I guarantee you'll see hundreds of articles in the trade press about how this is going to transform marketing. Because it takes, and Facebook was, what it tells me is that the reason Facebook bought it is they recognize that the Facebook page of the future is not going to look like it does today. The Facebook page is really boring. Right? It's just a bunch of pictures and some text. But it doesn't look at all like the virtual environments that kids want to walk around. So Facebook has to keep innovating and keep up with that. So, they just had some pocket change lying around for that $2 billion where they bought the Oculus Rift. So clearly we're going through the looking glass, just like Alice, where we're kind of jumping off through the mirror into this digital reality. And again, it's not that we're making a distinction, it's just part of the daily experience. And you see this sometimes reflected in advertising, where you see a fusion between animation, cartoon-like figures and photographic figures. I think that's reflecting these styles, Japanese anime and manga, those graphic styles that have really transformed a lot of advertising. So we have a process that I sometimes call reality engineering. And what I mean by that is that marketers, having run out of conventional places to put their messages, because we have such saturation with traditional advertising, platforms, magazines, and so on, they have to keep finding new places to put their messages. And so they engineer reality. In other words, they take a physical space and they actually change it. So what you see here, this is one of my favorite examples. This is, a soccer game, and you can see it's what we train our students to do. You want to buy exposure for your brand, your client, and every time the players go dribble the ball past midfield, it's going to get exposure to this Ruffles logo. So that's just good practice, right? As some of you may have guessed, however, if you were at the actual stadium, this logo is not there. It's only for people who are watching the game on television. And it's essentially the same technology that puts a down marker on a football game. But when you take that yellow line and now you say, well, I can really put anything on that field, what's happening is that you're fundamentally changing the visual experience that spectators are going to have. So that to me is a really important transformation. So that brings me into talking about virtual worlds. How many of you spend any time in virtual worlds? And I don't just mean your classroom, that's not a scary world. A couple of you do. Most of you probably have not spent any time in these worlds. These are some examples of what basically a virtual world is and I know Lyle knows very well about virtual worlds. These are digital interfaces that look a lot like video game technology, but they have real-time interaction in them. So you would enter as a digital figure and you can walk around and you can talk to other people who have entered from wherever they are in the world as digital figures, and you can have a conversation, and of course, you can have a lot of brand-related graphics and so on in there. Yeah.
Just as a matter of clarification, so would that include things like World of Warcraft and other fantasy kind of games where you also walk around as a fish and drug?
Yeah, in World of Warcraft, massive multiplayer games are using the same technology. I mean, roughly. The difference is that there's no game going on here. It's just you're just interacting with other people. So again, the boundary is a little blurred, but yeah, it's the same kind of thing. And so you can go into these things and you can take on an identity, like this good-looking guy here happens to be me, and you can walk around in these worlds. And so sometimes if you say this to people, virtual worlds, they go, well. So 2006, this was the cover of Business Week. And so this was Second Life. This was talking about Second Life, which is one of the biggest and earliest virtual worlds. It's still very active today, but people say, oh, that's so passe. That was we had all these .coms, we had all this exciting stuff that was going on 10 years ago, but of course, most of it has given way to reality, right? Not so much. If you look as of 2011, they crossed the 1 billion threshold, number of people who worldwide who participated in at least one virtual world. When you look today, that number is about 1.5 billion people globally who are participating in these environments. So even though we may not be familiar with them, there are plenty of people worldwide who are. So when you look at the numbers, when you look at the number of people who are paying, because many of these are free, but some of the business models are paying, where you would pay a subscription or something like that to go in. Of course, in World of Warcraft or something, you're going to be buying, tools, swords for your orc or whatever they are, When you look at how the numbers are growing, and you also recognize it's not just youth that are doing this. I mean, the typical gamer, the average age of a gamer today? 33.
But if you include casual games, though, it's a woman about 46.
Women today, I think, are about 40% of all gamers. So we have this stereotype of the gamer being this teenage boy with a lot of acne in the basement with pizza boxes. It is definitely not the case. Absolutely. Now, what's amazing to me, and so many managers have no idea this is going on, when you look per year at how much people are spending on virtual goods, in other words, products that they buy that are digital products only, that they can use to play in a game or in Second Life, maybe they're buying an outfit for their avatar, $1.5 billion per year in the US alone. That's what consumers are spending on this stuff. That's $1.5 billion for products that don't exist in the real world. It's pretty amazing. So, this is starting to enter into popular culture now. You all know the movie Avatar. That made my life easier because when people say to me, what's an avatar? Remember in the movie, this guy, he's a soldier, he's disabled, he's injured, he can't walk. Now he takes on this digital identity. He goes to this, this virtual environment where he's a 10-foot tall blue guy and he falls in love and he does all that stuff. So that really helped to popularize this idea. And what's amazing to me, for any of you who study, luxury goods or apparel or appearance or anything like that, the amount of latitude that you have in these virtual worlds to create identities and to study those identities is absolutely amazing. So the nuance that's there, the detail in terms of style of products, new product design, very, very active in these worlds because consumers can go in and they can actually create prototypes or help you to create prototypes of new products for free with no risk. So if you study self-concept or gender identity, it's an amazing place to be. You take a woman like this is a real woman, you can kind of see her story, she's got these babies, which is the hardest job in the world. She's a bit overweight, she's kind of, pretty frazzled. Now, when she goes into a virtual world, this is what she looks like. That's her avatar. That's the self that she's created. So as you can see, there's probably a bit of aspirational self going on here, right? So from a consumer behavior perspective, to look at how people are expressing identity in virtual worlds is absolutely amazing. In terms of education, we see a lot of this going on. This is my colleague Natalie Wood and I a few years ago built a Second Life campus that's a replica of our campus at St. Joseph's University. And so this is actually the lobby of my building, our business school. This is not me, this is Natalie. And you can create, you can recreate your own school with lots of sharp graphics and so on. And when you think about the future of higher education, already you have universities where you might have, let's say, an MBA program where you have one cohort that's taking your program in Dublin or Tokyo and another cohort that's taking it on your home campus. But they are together because they're all entering a virtual environment where they can interact with each other. Probably at least one version of the future of higher education. Just quickly, some of the other applications, training, enterprise training. IBM, as you might expect, is hugely invested in virtual world training environments. They've migrated almost all of their internal training to these. So if you were to get hired at IBM, you wouldn't go away for a 2-week orientation in Chicago. You would go onto their virtual world site where you'd interact with other employees. Shopping, as you might guess, tremendous amount of fashion design going on in Second Life and other platforms. This is Stardoll, a Swedish site. Again, those of you interested in fashion, this is how young girls today are learning about fashion. In the old days, they would go through magazines, they would leaf through magazines. Today, they're going to go onto a site like Stardoll, where they can see named designers that are going to go in there and show them what their clothing looks like. Advertising that's starting to go into these places, it's kind of been in fits and starts, but here, for example, Diesel. This is in the Sims game. Those of you know, if your students will recognize any game, by the way, it's the Sims. How many of you have played the Sims? So the Sims is the largest selling video game ever, but it's not a shoot 'em up game. It's all about community. So more women than men are going to be in here because it's about building things as opposed to shooting them like men like to do. You're starting to see licensing going on. I always forget what his name is. He's Snoop Lion or Dog, or he's back to Snoop Dogg. I think he was a lion for a while. But anyway, he's already licensed his appearance, as have other celebrities. So you've got companies that specialize in licensing agreements to put celebrities into these environments. In terms of doing research with young people, this is a screenshot from a study I did with some students a few years ago. This is an MTV-sponsored virtual world, and kids are going to go in here, and this is how they're going to be socialized. So we can actually send researchers in to go in and interview without ever leaving campus. They can go in. This was a study about conformity in clothing choices. There's something that adolescents know about. So we can go in and collect data that way. Store design, this is a prototype. This is under development by a very large chain in the UK. Okay, it's Tesco. And you can see the level of accuracy of the products, the store layout, etc. Trade shows, instead of flying your whole office to Vegas for a week, which is a lot of fun, very expensive and time consuming, we're seeing a lot of virtual trade shows starting to pop up where you can at least prospect or qualify your customers, because you can have a virtual exhibition hall and you can interact with people and exchange information about your brand, etc. Probably publishers will be doing that in a few years, right? Sales training, a great role playing. You have to do a lot of role playing when you train salespeople. This is a pilot that Natalie and I did. We have a big pharmaceutical marketing program at my university, and they always have role plays where the students have to come in and they have to role play calling on a doctor. That's a big part of the training. Very time consuming, expensive, agonizing for the students. So we created a virtual training scenario where and what I learned is the hardest thing you have to do if you're in detailing pharmaceutical sales is talking your way past the office manager, what they call the dragon lady. And there's usually a dragon lady at the desk who's going to prevent your access to the doctor. So they first have to talk their way past her before they now virtually walk into the doctor's office. This is an application we did for Mark, which is the youth division of Avon. And what we're doing here is, if you know anything about direct selling, it's an amazing, fascinating business. I got to go to the Mary Kay show a couple of years ago and stand next to the pink car. They didn't give me the car, but I got to stand. What we're doing here is we have a lot of these, who's the typical sales rep? It's going to be a woman in her 20s or 30s. She has no idea how to sell this stuff. She gets a kit in the mail, and she's supposed to go out and arrange these selling parties and stuff. They never can interact with other people because they might do it if they go to the annual meeting, but other than that, they have a sales call once a month with about 300 to 400 of these women on the line. So what we've done here is to create a virtual environment where the reps, most of them women, but not all, can come in and they can still get the same presentation that Mark would give them, but they can also interact with each other, and trade tips about, well, when you're calling on so-and-so, how do you do that? And the reaction was very positive because they finally get to interact with other people who are in the same situation they are. Okay, and then what's interesting is how some of this stuff is moving from the online world to the offline world. Some of you know this term, cosplay. So cosplay essentially is a global phenomenon started in Tokyo, where kids, they're going to like Comic-Con. You guys know Comic-Con. People come dressed as their favorite, superhero or whatever. People are dressing as their avatar. So they're creating an avatar identity in the virtual world, and then you can actually be that person in the real world. There are companies that make dolls that you submit an image of your avatar, and they'll send you a plush doll, a stuffed doll, it looks like. So this activity is moving back and forth. Okay, and then we have the integration, again, between the virtual and the physical world. And, here is where these new technologies are coming in. So augmented reality, again, literally overlaying physical information and digital information perceived simultaneously. So this is the technology as it is now. Some of you have this on your phones, perhaps, where you're walking down the street and now you can actually get it. You see, this bridal store, but now on your phone, when you look at it, it's going to bring up additional information, right? This is one vision of how this is going to, evolve, not in a good way, perhaps, as facial recognition software continues to advance, and we're integrating with various customer databases, police records, legal records. So we're able to superimpose, as someone's walking down the street, we might see an ad, but we might also know that this guy's a registered sex offender because the facial recognition software in our phone has connected to that database. From a marketing perspective, obviously some ethical privacy issues here. From a marketing perspective, if I see a guy walking down the street and I like his shirt, I'm probably not going to go up to him, excuse me, where did you buy that shirt? But now I don't have to do that because I can just point my phone at him. I know where he bought it, how much he paid for it, and I can order it through my phone. Augmented reality. Part of this is wearable computing. You're all seeing a lot about this. Of course, we have stuff like Fitbits, that you wear on your wrist and so on. Anybody seen the Microsoft HoloLens that they've just introduced? That's their latest technology. It's quite amazing. I don't have the time to show you a demo, but if you Google it, you'll see some nice videos of the HoloLens. And when you wear this on your head, you can actually have holographic images that you can manipulate. So this is let's say a new product is designed and a toolkit that doesn't exist in that physical world, but you're seeing it through the lens. Wearable computing. This is a prototype of a hoodie that's actually a phone. So it vibrates in different patterns depending on who's calling you. In other words, you don't answer your phone anymore, you answer your sweatshirt. This is, how many of you know Google Glass? Google Glass has been in the news a lot. It's actually been Google has put it off to the side for now because the market wasn't quite ready for it yet. But the technology that drives Google Glass, which is prime augmented reality, is being used in other ways. So, for example, the guy who started Second Life has started a new company in the last few years, and what you see here is what their people are doing with that Google Glass with that Google Glass technology.
Hey, this is Ryan from High Fidelity. We're obsessed here with low latency avatar-to-avatar communication, and we've been taking advantage of all this cool hardware that's got sensors in it, glass being one of those. And you can see that we've built a simple APK here that transmits its sensor data, glass's sensor data over UDP to our client and moves the avatar's head as I move around. We've got it locked in at about 50 hertz. Pretty cool stuff.
Do you appreciate the ramification of that? Where now in the real world, you can, just through your movements, if you're familiar with the Kinect technology, through your movements in the physical world, you can actually create a reality in the digital world. Pretty amazing. And so how do we monetize that? Well, in the industry, they're starting to talk about pay per gaze as a business model. And what that means is that that advertisers will get charged based on where your eyeballs are going, literally in these virtual environments. So here, what you're seeing here is a patent application in 2013 for a gaze tracking system. And it says it's an image recognition algorithm executed on the scene images to identify items within the external scene's view. And when you look at the patent, who applied for the patent, guess who it is? Google. So Google is getting into this pay-per-gaze mode. They're still, obviously it's not there yet, whereas we're now, as consumers, we're interacting with advertising in a virtual environment. Every time we look at an ad that's in this virtual space or on our phones, then that's how they're going to get paid for that. So when you look at augmented reality, you look at the growth of it, it's still very early days. 60 million users at the end of 13, already almost $500 million in advertising revenue at that time, and that was really early. In the Netherlands, for example, Layer, some of you may have Layer on your smartphones. That's an AR application. 1.3 million downloads of that. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a good chunk of the total user base of smartphones in Holland. So people are increasingly using this stuff. How can we use AR? And I'm going to show you how it works in a moment. One thing we can do is we can extend the customer experience in the store. So we can take a static display on a shelf, and now if I hold my device, my iPad or my phone up to it, it's essentially going to extend my ability to talk to consumers because I can bring up lots of other material. And I'll show you what that looks like. Here's an application. This is a company that I'm doing some work with. They're based in Montreal. And what you're going to see here, this is something they did for CoverGirl in Canada, where a package on a grocery store shelf now becomes a sales device for CoverGirl. In theory, you see.
Macy, I would never go without my CoverGirl. I want to look natural. Simply ageless foundation to help you look. 3 easy breezy beautiful CoverGirl.
If the product disappears by the time you get there, don't worry. I think you probably don't need an administrator sponge.
So think about the potential. You're taking the static box, and you've got, how do girls know how to put on makeup? It's a mystery to me, but now you can, just put your phone over the box and a model will show you how to do it. So, bear with me a second. We need a volunteer from the studio audience. You, I know, I need your name.
Hey, I'm the
This is a piece of paper. Everybody, I want you to verify it's just a piece of paper. It says color Xerox. Piece of paper. Okay, so if you could just hold it up like that way so everybody can see it. And I'm gonna see if I can walk in front of you.
I can walk.
It's a little hard to, I'm sorry, it's a little hard to
Okay,
The
you
demo.
want me to keep it up?
yeah, just keep it straight. You see it's just a guy standing there, right? Sorry, I'm gonna,
You want me to, I can lift it up.
Hi, it's me, Martin, education advisor. Are you close to hitting the bullseye? Not sure? Go ahead, try on target, enter your info. Want to know how? Join us on. Hi, it's me, Martin.
so I can start it and stop it. Let me show you, thank you. Let me show you another one. Yes, I still need you. Here's a trailer for a movie. Many of you know Django. So imagine this is a billboard you see on the, on the wall. So I can connect any content that I want now to this static image. And that static image, in this case, is of course a picture, but it can be any image in the world that I want. It can be a logo on a shirt or anything like that. Thank you very much. You did a great job. This one is for a game, by the way, an Xbox game. And so here you can see that it's going to pull out. And those of you in the back, I'll show you later. It's going to bring up one of the characters from the game.
So is that an app on there?
Yes, there's an app. There's an app that you download, a free app. And then,
Is it available yet? Or?
it's available. This company, it's called Merchler, Merchandise Loves Augmented Reality, and MERCHLAR. And you can, they have some demo videos on their site that you can look at.
Mike, have you seen the last year's IKEA catalog?
Yeah.
What they did with it?
Yeah, IKEA, did their catalog this way. So absolutely.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Wasn't the Amazon phone supposed to do some of these things? And it's been losing a lot of markets. My understanding was it was supposed to do a lot of this stuff.
I'm not sure. I'm not really sure. But this stuff is, it's a chicken and egg thing. Some of this stuff, like the QR technology, has been available. You all know the QR codes. It's a chicken and egg. I worked with a company in 2002 that had that technology available. They couldn't convince any of the phone companies to offer it, to make it available to download, because they said, well, nobody uses it. Well, nobody uses it because you don't make it available. So the QR codes reached a tipping point probably last year or two, where they're now becoming more widespread. But the advantage here is that you don't have to center your phone over something and take a photo of it, which then launches static content. So we're going to see more and more of this, I'm sure. Now we might ask if augmented reality can save print media, can save all these bookstores that are going out of business, because you can imagine, suppose you have a paperback book with a cover on it, and now the characters in that book, 50 Shades of Grey, I'd like to see that. They come up out of the woman, whoever their name, but she comes up out of there and tells you, here's how to tie me up. So you can imagine, and when I thought about this, I said, I've actually seen that. How can you make a newspaper come to life? Well, if you think about Harry Potter.
Yes.
That was the moving newspaper in Harry Potter. Well, that's essentially what augmented reality can do. And you can do it for newspapers, like I said, it could be on any surface. So it could be a logo on a cap, it could be on a credit card, it could be on pill bottles, which is something I'm exploring now, showing patients how to use their medication more effectively. It can be on a hotel key that you get. It could be on all sorts of things. So I've got about 15 minutes left. I've only gone through one boundary, but that's okay. I'm going to talk fast and get through the rest of them. The rest aren't as elaborate. The second boundary that I want to talk about is the collapse of the distinction between work and play. And again, as I talked about it earlier today, what we have is this increasing attention to social entertainment and the social media applications of social entertainment. And that's where the boundary between work and play is starting to evaporate. So we have, here's a familiar site, maybe not for you, but for many students. We also have board customers and we have board employees. So in all these different domains, we have the same consumer issue. How do we engage people, like I said earlier? How's this for a statistic from a Gallup poll? 70% of your employees hate their job. None of them are academics. So we have gamification. What is gamification? So a lot of people say, well, that's easy. I play a game, like I play Candy Crush when my boss thinks I'm doing something else. That is not gamification. Gamification is applying gaming elements to non-game contexts. So taking principles of game design now and moving them into places where we don't expect to see them. I'm going to skip over a few things in the interest of time, but Gartner, the big research firm, predicted by this year, 40% of global 1,000 organizations will use gamification as the primary mechanism to transform business operations. So we'll see if this was a prediction they made in 2013. I don't know if it's going to be 40%, but I'm seeing a lot of evidence of gamification going on in the corporate world. If you want an easy example of gamification that doesn't involve technology, really, check out the piano staircase. Some of your students will love this, by the way. This was a campaign Volkswagen did in Scandinavia. They wanted to encourage people to take the stairs instead of the escalator, for health reasons. So they took the staircase and they built it so that when you step on each of these keys, it makes a note. So you can walk up and down and play a song. And there's a great YouTube video for this. Over 17 million downloads of that video. And guess what? 2/3 of people took the stairs because they made something that was boring into something fun. And in the process, they sort of duped people into doing a healthy alternative. So that's a simple but elegant example of gamification. It usually involves, as I showed you at lunch, a leaderboard. There's some kind of competitive element to it. The badges, as I talked about. We have enterprise gamification where you take we all have to take, I don't know about you, but we have to sit through these boring training programs now, and I have to learn about how I'm not supposed to sexually harass my students. It's a good thing they pointed that out. But we have to take this stuff, and I showed this at lunch. We want to do things that are good for us, but it's like taking your medicine. So increasingly, we're seeing this incorporated into the enterprise. On the consumer side, anytime somebody, a company like Volvo is going to give you rewards in return for watching their advertising, and you're accumulating rewards. The simplest example is when you fly home and you say, oh, I've got X number of miles on US Airways or Delta. In a sense, frequent flyer program is a basic form of gamification. This was an application we did for Campbell's Soup, and they're interested in learning more about how millennials think about soup, because the answer is they don't buy a lot of soup. And so we created a virtual world application that's gamified, where teams of students come in and compete with each other to come up with new ways to use soup products. So that's an integration of what I showed you earlier with this. And so you get points and you can redeem those for prizes and so on. So that's an example of the new product development area for gamification. I told you these are going to go quicker. So the third boundary is the boundary between the self and what we own. So here, any of you are familiar with my CV book, I've used this ad for many years. I love it. You are what you drive, that kind of integration. A few years ago in France, Valentine's Whiskey did a promotion where they created the first animated tattoo, where this guy has essentially, like that image that I showed you, he had that tattooed into his body, and when you hold your phone over it, his tattoo will talk to you. So the tattoo and the phone literally are part of the same experience.
So you no longer need drugs.
That's right. So we talk about the extended self. The idea that you become kind of one with what you consume. And we know that this is a constant work in progress, so that the self and your possessions, whether it's cosmetic surgery or clothing or whatnot, constantly being used to modify who you are. We have Photoshop that I hope this is Photoshop, you know, where that pig has these beautiful lips. You know. So we've reached the point where what we see that's digitized is actually what we prefer to see as opposed to physical reality. So here's a model, here's a woman, very attractive woman. No way she's going to appear in a fashion ad. She's too imperfect. So they're going to take her into post-production now, and they're going to do this to her. And that's the woman that you're going to see, you know, on the billboard somewhere. So in the old days, what I would think of as pre-digital identity management, you think about a resume that you train your students to write. It's very formulaic, and that is your brand. So some of you probably talk to your students about the idea that you are a brand. This was your brand, you know, and it was a very static kind of thing. But of course, today with social media and so on, your brand is dynamic. You know, we'll probably just be doing Skype interviews at AMA, and you know, instead of going to AMA to find faculty members, I hope, you know. So we're in an era that I call digital identity management, where you're able to have virtual makeovers. You can upload a photo, see what you would look like with different colored hair, risk-free, playing with your identity. You can erase your social footprint for students who think that employers aren't going to look at their Facebook page. You have a company like Reputation.com that's for a fee is going to go back and erase your social footprint on different websites. Okay, I'm doing pretty well. We doing okay? You guys okay? Okay. So the fourth boundary, me versus we. Me versus we. So when I was a young lad, back in the 1800s, it was all about, you know, in the 60s and 70s, it was all about do your own thing. It was all about being a nonconformist. Now, of course, the paradox was that we all looked the same, we all wore the same torn jeans and so on. But there was a value placed on individuality, right? Now, today we have a slightly different mentality among young people. You've all experienced this, what's sometimes called food porn, where people can no longer experience their plate. You know, they can't eat until they have posted it on Instagram. In the same way that they don't find out that their boyfriend or girlfriend has broken up with them until they check their relationship status on Facebook. Right? So it's much more of a verification, you know, taking your physical experience, putting it out there and saying, is this okay? Am I okay now? I posted my meal and now I'm going to eat it. So, you know, we have, I think, maybe a lot more conformity now. Millennials are very concerned about what others think of them. They've been raised on a culture of self-esteem and so on. And so I think that the era of me that we used to talk about has now turned into an era of we. We talk a lot about crowdsourcing and using the wisdom of the collective marketplace now to get input. Using this in our classes, like I showed you in my talk earlier. We have a lot of different websites. Some of you are probably familiar with these, like Quirky. Everybody know Quirky? Quirky, check out Quirky. What they do is they solicit ideas for products, and the community votes on those products, and then they make the ones that people vote for. So if you're familiar with Threadless, they started a lot of this with clothing. But you have a lot of these crowdsourced websites like Kickstarter and Indiegogo and so on that are allowing individuals to participate in this collective process. So what's going on then is that, and this is the way Google looks at our shopping process, what they call the zero moment of truth. In the old days, I would go to the store, I would look at a package, I would throw it in my cart, and I would pay for it. And so the zero moment of truth in those days would be when I'm standing at the shelf. But today, that's no longer the zero moment of truth. Today, there's lots of moments that occur before that. So for a young person, typically they're gonna decide to buy something, they're gonna search for it online, they're gonna read reviews, they're gonna watch videos, they're gonna check with their social network, and then once they get approval, then they're gonna go to the shelf. So there's a tremendous, in terms of the consumer decision-making process, that has been elongated radically at the front end now. Really something to think about. So we talk about social shopping. Online shopping that simulates the bricks and mortar experience of going with your girlfriends to try on dresses for an afternoon. When you think about it, when you're shopping alone at home, it's much easier, but you don't get that experience of getting the social feedback. So we have new technologies now that are going to allow you to get feedback from your network before you buy, even though you're still buying online. So you're able to look at images from catalogs and tag them and get feedback. This is a site called Go Try It On, and so here you would post, this is what I'm going to wear on my date. 14 people thought you should wear it, 12 said. Actually, one of my doctors. But so in other words, you're voting, you're getting an election before you go out on a date. Would we have ever thought of doing that? Probably not. Augmented reality technology in stores, you're going to see more and more. Already Bloomingdale's is testing this. So now you're standing in front of a virtual mirror. You can superimpose an outfit on your body, and you can see what it looks like, and you can get feedback from your social network. And that makes your hips look too big, buy that. This is another one called Face Cake that puts out called Swivel. And so you're standing there in the store, but now instead of picking up each bag to look what it's going to look like when you're holding it, she can now swap out the different bags and see what they're all going to look like, and other things as well. That's called Face Cake. And finally, the boundary between consumers and producers, and perhaps the most fundamental one. We talk about the channel of distribution and the consumers, the end of that channel. That is no longer the case. That is no longer the case. A lot of you are very familiar with so-called collaborative consumption. And what that means is that increasingly, consumers don't want to own what they use. A fundamental change. Think about it. In our day, you want to own something. You want to own that record. It's part of your collection, right? You want to own that car. Well, today, kids aren't buying cars. Applications for driver's licenses among 16-year-olds, way, way down. People are preferring to lease rather than own, and it makes good economic sense in many cases, because if I live in the city and I have to pay for a car, I'm probably using the car, maybe 2 hours a week. The rest of the time it's sitting and I'm paying to garage it, and I'm paying for insurance and maintenance and all that. Same thing with Airbnb. Most of you know about Airbnb. Tremendous success in the tourism industry. I have an extra room in my house. I'm not, I'm paying. I have to pay for it every month, but I'm not using it. Why don't I rent it out? The bikes, they have these on the streets here in Chicago on Michigan Avenue. I just saw them. Music, Spotify, books, dare I say, where we now can trade books instead of buying them. Rent the Runway. If any of you use Rent the Runway? And Rent the Runway, you can rent a dress, like you have a big formal or something coming up, rather than paying whatever you pay for that dress, using it once. You literally rent it, they send it to you. When you're done, you package it up and send it back. So here you've got this explosion of user-generated content where we as individuals are participating in the marketing process. We are becoming producers rather than just consumers. Now, of course, the trade-off is we have higher engagement, because if you're involved in making something, you're much more interested in it, right? But as managers, we're losing control of that content, because now consumers are able to do whatever they want with our stuff and change it, and they will change it, right? These are all examples of modifications that consumers have made to brand logos. And you can see, some of them are pretty good. So if you give consumers that digital raw material, they will play with it. They will absolutely play with it. They'll find new uses for products. So imagine if you designed this lighter and you never thought that was going to be, with jewelry or whatever. So you don't own your brand anymore. Get over it. Get over it. That is the new reality. Consumers are part of the brand definition process. They're going to be creative. They're going to do lots of things with brands and images that you never would have even thought of. So in terms of branding theory, in the old days, we thought about brands as assets that are controlled by the firm. That is no longer the case. Today, brands are co-created entities. It's a partnership. Brands, we used to say, exist in the minds of consumers. No, brands live in cultures. They're part of the broader experience that we all download. We used to focus in our research on defining what brands mean. Today, I think we have to say, how do brands come to me? That is, what is the development process where consumers are taking that raw material and changing the meaning of it over time? So when we think about metrics in terms of how consumers are engaging, again, I started at the beginning by saying engagement is the holy grail. Here's how Forrester Research looks at it. These are the types of metrics that they're using with their clients because they recognize that simple ones like brand awareness, purchase intent, and so on really are not going to capture this more dynamic process. So they're going to look at engagement as the central part of their metric system, their ecosystem. And so discovery, for example, interaction, these are the ways that they're going to think about how consumers engage with brands. Totally different experience. So again, in the old days, we put people in these boxes. We talk about these static market segments. Today, a communications network is going to look more like this when we look at online referral patterns and so on. It doesn't fit into pretty little boxes. So we have to start with these fundamental dichotomies that we have learned over the years to just assume are true, and we have to say, you know what, these no longer are activated. So there I am, and I think we still have a few minutes left. If anyone has any questions or comments or want to throw through, here I am.
Can you flip back to the metrics?
You have a question or you just? Oh, okay.
Connect this to, if you would, your discussion the last hour. And it's what ought this to do to textbooks?
You have to ask me. What it means is, I talked about the transition from sage on the stage to guide on the side. What it means is that we have to find ways to bring the students into the co-creation process, where we have to recognize that we can, we still are masters of the key terms, so to speak, but we have to allow them to help us to create the content that's going to make sense for them. And a lot of that content is not going to exist in the physical classroom, but rather in the places where they already live. So, what I'd like to say is you have to fish where the fish are and try to take this content that we've delivered on dead trees for so long and now put it in interactive environments that make more sense to these kids, especially not so much our current students, but their younger brothers and sisters are coming into college and expecting to interact in a more of a gaming environment because that's how they're spending their time in elementary school and high school.
It's more than changing the delivery method, it's actually the content.
Yes, it's a co-creation of content, that's right. Yeah, so it involves, I think, more saying to the student, okay, it's not just me telling you that this is valid. Think about your own experience and you tell me what it is. And usually our students have a lot more to teach us, I think, at least in my case, than I have to teach them. So the question is, how do we harness that collective energy? Again, not just any one student, but crowdsourcing that, getting all this, because all of them are smarter than any one of them, and pulling that together. I don't have all the answers to that, but I think that's the way we have to go. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, a brief question. Well, I have two, but I'll ask one with other people. So you were showing that Google is developing this system where they could charge by gaze. And I was wondering, this is a little bit further removed from being charged by some kind of outcome from the consumer side that a lot of the advertisers would like to see. So is that just because Google is getting so powerful that they can shift that balance in their favor? Or is this something that maybe not even going to survive? Because again, the majority of advertisers nowadays want to see more result-driven payment scheme.
Well, first of all, they've always monetized exposure, ad impressions.
Mm-hmm.
It's just in a different format. But my guess would be that over time, they're going to need to link that back now to behavior. So, but it's a great way, if you think about it, let's say you've got two versions of an ad. So you're doing an A/B test. And you know whether the consumer bought as a result of that. And now you can look in and see what parts of the message did they look at, and how does that relate to which is the more effective ad. So clearly they're gonna, they're not just gonna monetize based on what you look at. At the end of the day, it's, did you look at it and did that change your brand awareness or your likelihood of buying and so on. But they have to walk before they can run by now tracking at a very micro level where your eyeballs are going in a virtual environment, because they can no longer rely on you just to sit and read a magazine and say, yes, I read that magazine, which in itself is not a very accurate predictor. That's why the traditional advertising industry is in such trouble, because something like direct marketing allows you to tie that to metrics much easier. Yes?
I'm finding this all very interesting. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a raspy voice because I have a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old.
My condolences.
Yeah, some days I need it. But I see them living this, and as I've been explaining to my classes, I said, especially my seniors, you are different than my kids. So when you're tossing out the term millennials, my children are not millennials. Mine are the Generation Z, and I see some of this applying, some of it not. And what keeps going through my mind are the medical and psychological ramifications of what's happening, which makes me very nervous. My class and I were just talking about this with the wearables. Do we really know what they're doing to your body? When you're looking at Google Glass, even the Nintendo 3DS, if you go, back now, a couple of generations, they're saying, what does that do to our depth perception? It all frightens me a little bit. Maybe I'm old, but
it scares me too. And the evidence is mixed. I mean, there is evidence that that kids' brains are literally rewiring. Now, is that better or worse? I mean, the military uses video games to train pilots because it actually improves your depth perception. So there's positives to it, but on the other hand, I got a Fitbit. I'm not wearing it now, but how do I know that that's not giving off some kind of gamma ray or something? We know that cell phone use can cause brain cancer if you hold it up to your head too long. So you're absolutely right. But to your broader point, your kids are, when I talk to my students, I'm sure you guys are the same. I put stuff in front of them. How many of you are involved in virtual worlds? They look at me like I'm from Mars.
yes.
They're not. I think they're not quite that generation. But like I tell them, do any of you have younger brothers and sisters at home? What are they doing? Oh yeah, well they come home from school and they're immediately jumping into one of these virtual worlds and they're playing that, Pablo Hotel or something.
The funny thing is, maybe it's just my son, but he's actually going back to these older.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the thing right now.
It's almost a
retro.
going back.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we have no idea what we're getting into, and it could be like remember the old ads where doctors said, this is my cigarette brand, 9 out of 10 not. This Fitbits could kill you. Right? It's killing me because it's making me take more steps. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I'm wanting to make sure I understand the me versus we aspect. So I'm wondering about the use of those terms and what you explained a little bit more, because as I'm listening, I'm thinking, is it really just me in isolation or me not in community versus me now being in community? And so the focus is still really all about me, or is the focus really shifting to a we-ness? So I'm thinking about our, particularly the U.S. obsession with being this individualistic culture, and to the extent to which this weakness really is happening versus it just still being me, but me to a different kind of degree. Can you talk about that?
That's a great question. I think part of it is just semantics, because there's always going to be a me, but the question is it a collective me or is it an individual me? And the reality is that kids today have more than one identity. I mean, we all do to some extent. But they often are going to have multiple email addresses. So they're going to have multiple avatars. And so when you say, what is the real you, it's almost not a valid question. And so part of who I am is who my peer group thinks I am. So, and symbolic interaction is, James Horton Cooley wrote about that in 1902, about the looking glass self, and the idea that a good part of how I think about myself is how I imagine other people see me. That hasn't changed, but the difference is that we now have the ability to poll people much quicker. In the old days, you would buy something, say an article of clothing, and then your friends would either make fun of you or they'd say, that's really great. But today, you have the ability to get the feedback before you buy it. So it's not, again, there's nothing new under the sun in that sense. But because we have access to the collective judgment of our peers, it's speeding up that entire process. I don't know if that answers your question, but there's always going to be a me. It's just that a big part of it is a digital me rather than just physical.
The other one, my other question is about those apps where you can, let's say, change purses right in the store in front of a mirror. And I was wondering if my understanding is that one of the major advantages of the physical store environment as opposed to buying it online is I can touch things.
Mm-hmm.
So isn't that erasing that almost only big advantage?
Yeah, I mean, there's I've seen prototypes of what's called a haptic glove. Haptic means touch. A haptic glove that actually allows you to touch something digitally and have the impulses transmit. Now that's not commercially available yet, but we are reaching the point where to a greater degree you'll be able to simulate the touch. But you're right that the physical experience of that product is still important, and that's why there's still a role for stores. But so notice that I showed you that picture. It's in a store. I mean, you could do that at home too. But the value of it being in a store is that first you can see visually what you like, narrow it down maybe.
Oh, okay.
So instead of holding 50 purses, now you know that there's only 10 that look good. However, when you decide a purse looks good, and of those 10, now you can or think about shoes or jeans. Right, the average woman tries on 10 pairs of jeans when she goes jean shopping. That's a lot of physical activity. So to the extent that you can narrow it down and say, well, really, up to 10, there's only 3 styles that actually look good on me. Now I'm going to try those on and see how they feel. So I don't think it's a replacement. I think it's a complement.
Would that increase the showrooming problem, though? Or do you believe there's a problem?
Well, I think there is a problem with showrooming. But it's bringing people into the store.
Oh, okay.
And so it probably, in a way, it could work the other direction because you're more likely to have an impulse buy where, let's say someone's standing in front of the mirror, they haven't thought about buying a scarf to go with the outfit.
Okay.
You can't do that from home necessarily. Oh yeah, so here's 3 scarves that might look good. And now the salesperson, there's a role for the salesperson to say, since you're buying this bag, how about trying on this scarf? And I'm going to, instead of tying it on your neck, I'm going to put it on you virtually. And you say, okay, wrap it up. All right, I don't want to overstay my time here because I know we have to move on. So thank you all very much. If anyone wants to see that technology I was showing in the back,